and welcome to Education and Training.
The following workshop has been designed to support your understanding of debating and to provide an opportunity to practice your debating skills. Debate is a method of formally presenting an argument in a structured manner. It is a formal contest of argumentation between two teams. Debates in one form or another are commonly used in democratic societies to explore and resolve issues and problems. But why debate? By engaging in debate, you can develop strategies that will make you more persuasive when presenting your arguments. Debating can develop your public speaking skills and increase your confidence. Moreover, debating is an enjoyable way of exploring important issues and learning both sides of an argument. The workshop includes two activities. Activity 1 consists of a short video clip regarding debating, followed by instructions on how to structure and organise your debate. Activity 2 consists of a short video clip on an issue of contention. You will then receive advice on how to formulate your argument and finally be presented with the issue for debate. I recommend that whoever is leading the workshop does not take part and makes notes in order to provide the group with feedback on completion of the workshop. Activity 1.
So the history of debate is really interesting. You can tie it back to the ancient Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, people like that who had a tradition of public argument. But in terms of competitive debate, like debating to win, that's a very British thing. It comes out of the public schools and the universities, particularly of the 19th century. Today, there are many different formats of debate. These can range from policy debate to Lincoln Douglas debate, from public forum debate to parliamentary debate, from congressional debate to impromptu debate. All of them have in common the idea of research, being articulate, and being able to convince a neutral third party that you're right about something. The first thing that you learn when you join a debate team is how to structure an argument. An argument has three basic parts: a claim, a warrant, and an impact. A claim is what it is that you're trying to prove in the first place. The warrant is the evidence for why that is true, and the impact is why it matters in the first place. One thing that really differentiates a school debate from a presidential debate is something called the burden of rejoinder. So what that means is if your opponent brings something up, you need to respond to it, because if you don't respond to it, it's true. So in other words, if I tell you the sky is purple, if you don't reply to it, the sky, for the intents of the debate, is purple.
I think one of the most difficult things with new debaters is this concept we call switch side debating.
In other words, in one round you're going to affirm a resolution. You're going to say, I agree with this resolution, and the next round you're going to negate it. You're going to say, I disagree with this resolution. That strikes people as really strange, because usually when you think about debating, you think that you're upholding a side that is something you believe in. That's actually not the case in competitive debate.
Where's the fun in defending something that you already believe? That's easy. It's hard to defend something that you don't believe in, and a lot of people really struggle with it.
Debate has a lot in common with the martial arts, especially judo. The philosophy of judo and the martial arts is if someone takes a punch at you, you don't punch back, you use the energy from that punch to flip them on their back and incapacitate them. So when you're attacking your opponent, conceding arguments gives you that energy you need to flip the opponent on their back. So you might concede some arguments and then say, but then there's one argument here that it just doesn't make much sense to me, and I want to attack that.
Listening in a debate is just as important as speaking in a debate. If you don't know what your opponent is saying, you're not going to be able to respond to their arguments.
Most people aren't listening. Most people are waiting for their turn to make their arguments. That's a very different operation than listening. To listen very carefully, because everything they say, they have to be held accountable for. The second most important thing, I think, is in a short amount of time conveying a lot of things that you want to say.
You're taught how to think 10 times faster than you normally would. You have so many different arguments to deal with, and you have to basically come up with a 4 to 8 minute speech within a minute.
An important skill that debaters learn quickly is to read the judge. Debaters learn to identify certain things about judges either by judging a book by its cover or by finding out a little bit about who that judge is before the debate round. Politicians do this all the time. When you hear politicians adopt slightly different accents or slightly different approaches, they're doing what high school debaters do. They're adapting.
Debate can definitely translate into real-world skills very well. Whether you're on a job interview, whether you're just trying to have a conversation with someone one-on-one, you're hitting on people in bars, I mean, just the ability to talk to people is something that very few people have and everybody covets.
A great skill that debaters get is the ability to sort of read whether a source is credible or not. If you turn on the television or you go on the internet, opinion is sort of often presented as fact or as news.
So we really need to teach people to say, hey, how do I find the other side here? How is this argument working me over? And how can I resist that?
I've been forced to take on so many different positions and so many different perspectives that personally I don't really believe in. And now when I meet a person and they have, a point of view that originally I would have thought, wow, this person's completely, out of their mind. And I think about it and I can say, well, I've had to defend that position, so I know where they're coming from. And that trait is such a useful trait in society to have if we want to be able to get along with people whose opinions we don't share. We need to be able to understand where they're coming from and to be able to walk a mile in their shoes. Debate allows you to do that.
The debate. This plan is a suggested format for setting out the debate, with the chairperson in the middle. On either side of the chairperson, you have the motion for and the motion against. I'll now briefly describe the role of each person that is taking part in the debate. The first affirmation is somebody who will need to introduce the topic of the debate, define all key terms, explain the line of argument, offer 2 to 3 substantive claims which you can explain with data and warrants in support of your argument, address what the negative team's likely line of argument will be, and how your argument already takes such a position into account. The next stage is for the first negative. Again, someone will need to introduce the negative line of argument. Offer 2 to 3 substantive claims which you explain with data and warrants in support of your team's argument. Provide a rebuttal to the first affirmative. Identify specific claims made by the affirmative team and explain how your argument answers and refutes these claims. The next stage is for the second affirmation. You need to extend the argument made by the first speaker. Offer a further 1 to 2 new substantive claims in support of your argument. Provide a rebuttal to the first negative. Identify specific claims made by the negative team and explain how your argument answers and refutes these claims. The second negative is exactly the same as the second affirmative and follows immediately after this person has spoken. The last role is for somebody in the team to summarize your argument. Someone will need to attempt to isolate and present the key points of contention that have occurred in the debate. Explain why your team has offered a solution to resolve the points of contention. Extend the key arguments that have been advanced by your team. Offer refutation of the opposing argument, and offer a final thought on how the argument should be resolved. The order for arguing is as follows. The first person is the first affirmative. The second person to speak is the first negative. The third person is the second affirmative, and the fourth person to speak is the second negative. Then there is time for open debate. Following the period of open debate, the fifth person is the person that summarizes and finalizes the argument for the motion. And the sixth person to speak is the person that summarizes and finalizes the argument against the motion. The chairperson has a very important role, and at the beginning of the debate, the chairperson must introduce the topic of the debate. Point out which teams are the affirmative and negative. Introduce speakers of the affirmative and negative in speaking order so that everyone is clear on the structure of the debate. Act as timekeeper, which is 3 minutes per speaker and 10 minutes for open debate. You will also need to make the speakers aware of when they are coming to the end of their allotted time by making some signal such as a knock on the table or banging a bell in order to give them prior warning before their time finishes. You also call on each speaker in turn so that the debate is controlled. You may also want to provide some additional rules in making sure that the debate is of sufficient decorum. Activity 2.
Syria's war is a mess. After 6 years, the conflict is divided between 4 sides, each side with foreign backers, and those foreign backers don't even agree with each other on who they're fighting for and who they're fighting against. And now, Syria's use of chemical weapons has provoked President Donald Trump to directly attack Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This is a major development because up until now, the US has only been focused on fighting ISIS. To understand the crisscrossing interventions and battle lines in Syria today and how it got this way, it helps to go back to the beginning of the conflict and watch to see how it unfolded. The first shots in the war were fired in March 2011 by Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad against peaceful Arab Spring demonstrators. In July, the protesters start shooting back, and some Syrian troops even defect from the Syrian army to join them. They call themselves the Free Syrian Army, and the uprising becomes a civil war. Extremists from around the region and the world start traveling to Syria to join the rebels. Now, Assad actually encourages this by releasing jihadist prisoners to tinge the rebellion with extremism and make it harder for foreign backers to support them. In January 2012, Al-Qaeda forms a new branch in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra. Also around that time, Syrian Kurdish groups who had long sought autonomy take up arms and informally secede from Assad's rule in the north. That summer is when Syria becomes a proxy war. Iran, Assad's most important ally, intervenes on his behalf, and by the end of 2012, Iran is sending daily cargo flights and has hundreds of officers on the ground. At the same time, the oil-rich Arab states in the Persian Gulf begin sending money and weapons to the rebels, mainly to counter Iran's influence. Iran steps up its influence in turn in mid-2012 when Hezbollah, a Lebanese militia backed by Iran, invades to fight along Assad. In turn, the Gulf states respond, Saudi Arabia really stepping up this time to send more money and weapons to the rebels, this time through Jordan, who also opposes Assad. By 2013, the Middle East is divided between mostly Sunni powers generally supporting the rebels and Shias generally supporting Assad. That April, the Obama administration, horrified by Assad's atrocities and the mounting death toll, signs a secret order authorizing the CIA to train and equip Syrian rebels. But the program stalls. At the same time, the US quietly urges Arab Gulf states to stop funding extremists, but their requests basically go ignored. In August, the Assad regime uses chemical weapons against civilians, provoking condemnation from around the world.
Men, women, children lying in rows, killed by poison gas. It is in the national security interests of the United States to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons through a targeted military strike.
Russia proposed on Monday that Syria surrender control over its chemical weapons to the international community for its eventual dismantling to avoid a U.S. military strike.
The U.S. ends up backing down, but the whole thing establishes Syria as a great powers dispute, with Russia backing Assad and the U.S. opposing him. Just weeks later, the first American CIA training in arms reached Syrian rebels. The U.S. is now a participant in the war. In February 2014, something happens that transforms the war. An Al-Qaeda affiliate based mostly in Iraq breaks away from the group over internal disagreements. The group calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, and it becomes al-Qaeda's enemy. ISIS mostly fights not Assad, but other rebels and Kurds, carving out a mini-state it calls its caliphate. That summer, it marches across Iraq, seizing territory and galvanizing the world against it. In September, 1 year after US almost bombed Assad, it begins bombing ISIS.
We're moving ahead with our campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists, and we're prepared to take action against ISIL in Syria as well.
That summer, in July, the Pentagon launches its own program to train Syrian rebels, but will only train those who will fight ISIS, not Assad. The program fizzles, showing that America now opposes ISIS more than Assad, but that there's also no like-minded Syrian proxy forces on the ground in Syria. In August, Turkey starts bombing Kurdish groups in Iraq and in Turkey, even as these Kurdish groups are fighting ISIS in Syria. But Turkey doesn't bomb ISIS. This gets to one of the big problems in this conflict. The US sees ISIS as its main enemy, but the US's allies like Turkey and a lot of Middle Eastern states have other priorities. This makes for a lot of unclear and confusing alliances. The next month, in September, Russia intervenes on behalf of Assad, sending a few dozen military aircraft to a long-held Russian base in the country. Russia says it's there to bomb ISIS, but in fact only ends up bombing anti-Assad rebels, including some backed by the US. The next year, Donald Trump wins the White House, vowing to stay out of Syria and signaling that Assad should be able to stay in power. At the end of 2016, Assad, helped by Russian air power and Iranian-sponsored militias, retakes the Syrian city of Aleppo, knocking the rebels out of their last remaining urban stronghold. Then, in spring 2017, Assad once again uses chemical weapons against his people, killing 85, including 20 children. Back in the US, Trump says his attitude towards Syria and Assad has, quote, changed very much due to the attacks. He vows to respond, and within just a few days, the White House launches dozens of Tomahawk missiles that strike an airbase in Syria. This is the first time the United States has directly attacked the Assad regime, and this adds yet another crisscrossing complication to the already multi-dimensional civil war. So as it stands now, Syria is in ruins. Even as Assad recaptures land, the rebellion perseveres, and with outside countries fueling each of the groups, it's clear that there's still no end in sight.
Arguing is all about who is the most persuasive. Aristotle wrote one of the first great treatises on rhetoric in the 4th century BCE, and it outlines the three main rhetorical appeals: logos, pathos, and ethos. These three persuasive strategies make up the rhetorical triangle. Logos is the main component of an argument. When you are presenting an appeal to logos, you present logic, facts, or truth. It is the message by which you attempt to reason with your audience. A good strategy is to ensure your facts are sound whilst identifying where the opposing argument contains logical fallacies and facts that do not hold true. Pathos is the appeal to emotions. For example, you can move your audience to fear in order to persuade them to buy a product that prevents illness. Sadness can cause an audience to donate to a cause, or you can move your audience to believe that certain opinions or actions will make them happy. Ethos attempts to show that the person or entity communicating is a valid source of information and is credible, and that the information can be trusted. Of course, the strongest arguments are constructed on points that take advantage of logos, pathos, and ethos together. When presenting your argument, ensure you identify your claim, the warrant, and the underlying assumptions, and provide your facts with reasoning which appeals to authority. Here is the issue for debate. The UK is unable and unwilling to intervene in Syria. You should now organise the teams and provide 30 minutes for research and 15 minutes for constructing arguments. You should now have a good understanding of how to structure a debate and present an argument. The more you practice these skills, the more effective and persuasive your arguments will be. There are many other issues to explore, so why not try another debate based on issues relevant to your unit? Well, that's the debating workshop complete.
If you've enjoyed this workshop, then please visit Education and Training for more options. And thank you for visiting.